Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Making the Transition from Student to Academic Affairs, work that focuses on diversity and inclusion. This webinar is co-sponsored by the ACPA Coalition for Multicultural Affairs and the Commission for Academic Affairs. My name is Catherine Madden, and I coordinate the master's program in the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education at the University of Michigan. All participants' audio and video capabilities are muted by default. So if you have a question, please plan to submit it to us via text. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the webinar and to do so by typing them into the questions option that you see on the GoToWebinar dashboard on your screen. Today, we hope to explore career pathways of several individuals whose professional journeys begin with a foundation in student affairs and who now focus on diversity and inclusion initiatives in more academic spaces. Joining us for this conversation are panelists Shannon Ashford, Jasmine Lee, Shannon Van Gundy, and Amber Williams. Our discussion today is moderated by Dr. Lynn Hogan. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this.
Well, on behalf of the Coalition and the Commission, I want to say welcome and also to say thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I also want to say a very special thank you to our panelists. We are going to proceed with a series of pre-scripted questions, but please, as Katie indicated, whenever you have a question, please type it into your screen and we will try to get to it. So let's begin with a quick introduction. First off, we have Shannon Ashford. She's at Wake Forest University. Then we have Jasmine Lee. She's at Michigan State University. Then we have Shannon Van Gundy at the University of Michigan. And finally, we have Amber Williams, who is also at the University of Michigan. So we're going to start with our first question. Our first question is, what is your current position and what type of work do you do? And if you could also help us out by providing an example of the type of initiative or projects that you're currently involved in.
Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Ashford, and I serve as the Program Manager for Diversity Education in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Wake Forest University. And that office falls directly under the Provost footprint. And in that role, we deliver comprehensive training, coaching, consulting to academic departments, campus life departments, and students. So we work with all faculty, students, and staff here on campus. We are mainly and primarily focused with the undergraduate college and all of the departments and students that fall under there, but we also have done work with our law school, business school, and other of our professional schools on campus. What two initiatives that I am recently or personally focused on is first, our new student orientation, mandatory for every single student to participate in a diversity and inclusion workshop at the beginning of the school year for our first year transfer students. And we focus on empathy and using that as a tool for building community. Also co-instruct a first year experience course that has a cohort of all first gen students.
Thanks. So hi, everybody. I'm Jasmine. And so I am a Neighborhood Director for Student Success at Michigan State University, which is centered within the Neighborhood Student Success Collaborative inside of the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education. So primarily my work is really around student success initiatives. So my job is to develop, implement, and assess student success work, primarily for first and second year students. I also supervise our academic advising processes and policies for exploratory preference students who are first and second year as well. In addition to that, some of the work that I do across campus involves some more of consulting, workshops, trainings, and things of that nature that really help to further our DE&I goals at the institution. So one of the things that I'm really excited about right now, I haven't really stopped talking about them. I talk about it every chance I get, but we started a brand new pilot for faculty dialogues on race this year, just started this semester, and so that's really exciting, helping us to think about the ways that we can influence student success both outside of the classroom, but also within the classroom with faculty and staff, and so that's in partnership with our Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives.
Awesome. My name is Shannon Van Gundy, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Identity and Diversity in Organizations program at the Ross School of Business. And my program specifically focuses on teaching our undergraduate business students, and there's about 2,500 of them, about identity and self-awareness around their identities and diversity within the context of business and business organizations. The program is co-curricular, but it's required for all of our students to graduate. And the majority of my work is planning the programming that students can attend to fulfill that requirement, as well as managing the back-end pieces, which include a reflection paper that all students have to submit in order to fulfill the milestone. And a recent and exciting project that I got to work on was incorporating some of our identity workshops into our sophomore experience course. So last week we had about 300 of our sophomores come through an intro to social identities workshop in their sophomore experience courses. So that's sort of an example of what I am doing on the day-to-day.
Hi everyone, I'm Amber Williams, and I also work at the University of Michigan at the School of Social Work with the Community Action and Social Change undergraduate minor program. It is a 16-credit multidisciplinary opportunity for students across campus to engage in efforts around social justice, both in thinking about their role as change agents in society, thinking about identity, their passion for social justice and what motivates that, understanding inequality and how that manifests in various contexts in society as well. But also thinking about skill sets, whether it's around sort of facilitation or looking at methods of change around community practice and community organization. So a really wonderful opportunity that we have here for students on campus. And of course, I get to work within that context with the faculty director, Katie Richard-Schuster, who sort of manages our broader efforts. So a huge part of my role as both assistant director and then also as adjunct lecturer, so I teach part-time for the minor and then also for the master's program as well. And within my role, it really is about fostering partnerships, thinking about partnership opportunities to really grow program efforts within the minor to allow for students to engage in a variety of ways. So a couple of examples of that includes working with the University Musical Society, so thinking about ways that students can access a variety of performances here on campus, but to also have some kind of context setting or a workshop to really understand sort of the nature of art and activism, to go to a performance and then to also come back and think about skill sets and methods around social change with relationship to the performance that they went to. We are also expanding to think about a global abroad opportunity, and so looking at a sort of rural development placement that would be in Chennai, India. And so looking forward to having a global independent study opportunity for students in the minor. And we're also partnering with Poverty Solutions. And so an opportunity for students within the minor to engage in a certificate program that allows them to think about disparities with relationship to socioeconomic status and broader structural issues related to kind of classism largely. And so looking at ways that the academic minor can sort of leverage our course offerings, but also create a pathway for students to engage researchers and faculty who operate within that center through that certificate. So a few different opportunities that we are sort of expanding and allowing for students to engage that sit at the co-curricular level in terms of both the academic context and then these larger efforts outside of the classroom as well.
Well, thank you very much. Our second question is, could you provide us with a brief summary of your career journey and what led you to your current position? And I guess we will start with Jasmine.
Fantastic. So a little bit about my career journey. It's been a little bit all over the place. I started off in working in a program called the Summer Incentive Program at Eastern Michigan University, Go Eagles. And that is was at the time, I think it's since been restructured and renamed, but was essentially a summer boot camp program, Summer Bridge, that provided conditional admittance opportunities for students who otherwise wouldn't be admissible into the institution for GPA or other reasons. And so that was really kind of my first introduction to higher education as a professional staff member. When I was in undergrad, though, I was working also at Eastern. So Eastern is my alma mater. I was working at the Center for Multicultural Affairs, which also really introduced introduced me to university-wide diversity programming for the first time. And then I think the other important piece that kind of rounds out my foundation is that I'm a trained social worker. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in social work. And so while I was doing both of those experiences, both as an undergrad and then after I graduated as a professional staff member, I was still thinking and working as a social worker. And so I think all three of those things kind of coalesce to create this passion and this drive for the work that I do. And so fast forward, I started working, came to Michigan State in 2011 to work with James Madison College, which is a small residential college here on our campus. And I was hired to be their coordinator of diversity programming to kind of do really traditional Cultural Heritage Month programs and things of that nature. And in a short about 4 or 5 years, we were able to grow that office to full-time programming that included initiatives around diversity and inclusion, social justice and equity, first-year programming, some coursework that we were able to add to it, in addition to consultation with our faculty and support with our recruitment initiatives as well. And so as a part of that work, I became even more passionate, not just about diversity, inclusion, social justice and equity, but also about how those things really connect more directly to student success broadly, right? So a lot of times when we're thinking about student success, we're thinking about graduation rates, retention, persistence, and things of that nature. And we say, oh, we need to provide more academic resources, more tutoring, more this, more that. But for me, what it's really about is all of the things that are happening outside of the classroom and how those things connect back to graduation rates and persistence. So if a student doesn't feel seen, if they don't feel like they belong, if they don't feel like the campus climate is warm and welcoming, if they don't feel like they have a strong support system, right? Some of these non-cognitive variables, if they don't know how to navigate the system of the university, then they won't be successful, regardless of how many resources we add, right? And so that's really kind of the work that I do now. And so 2 years ago, I transitioned into my position as a neighborhood director for student success. And so I'm able to pull in all of that stuff, some of that social justice and equity lens work into the work that I do to help even my academic advisors think about the ways that they ask questions when students come in to talk about course changes or course drops or brief absences or whatever. Then we need to really be thinking about a holistic picture of their experience and not just the classes, not just the classroom. And so that's a little bit, I guess, an abridged version of my journey. Off campus, I'm also pretty involved. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about and what brought me to ACPA is participating with the Pan-African Network within the Coalition for Multicultural Affairs. So I'm excited to be here helping with or representing CMA and also PAN. And so I joined PAN 3 years ago and have grown significantly professionally and have made some really strong and significant connections across the country through that organization as well. And I'm actually the current chair for this year. And so that has continued to show up in my work as well, and being able to pull in all of the resources and connections from folk that I continue to learn from and glean expertise from. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the abridged version of my journey.
Who wants to step in now?
I'll go ahead and jump in. So I started my professional career working in college access in K-12 for about 4 years, and then went back to grad school, your traditional higher ed program at Kent State. Hey, flashes, if anybody's in there, logged in. But went to Kent State and worked in our Student Multicultural Center and did multicultural affairs my first year. And then my second year worked in our Center for Student Involvement, specifically with student leadership development. And then I transitioned to Wake Forest with my first professional role in the field in higher education, and worked in our Office of Student Engagement, specifically with campus activities, serving as the advisor of the programming board, supporting student organizations, and also dibbling and dabbling in some leadership development there. And once I got here to Wake, there's so many opportunities internally and externally, but specifically internally to do your own professional development and diversity and inclusion, whether we look at, my experience in working in K-12, specifically with underrepresented students. Many of them, if matriculating onto college, would be and are some, first-gen students in college. And so, that really is what started my excitement and passion around diversity and inclusion and equity as it relates to education as a whole. And so then that's always been a part of the lens that I use, and I infuse it in anything that I do, whether or not it was in my title per se. So then coming here to Wake and working with our programming board and other student orgs, I would find myself seeking opportunities to make sure that diversity and inclusion was infused in the development opportunities that we were providing to students, and looking at the various social justice initiatives that we had on campus, I would get involved in that way. And so 2 years in, there was an opportunity to move directly into our diversity and inclusion office and be able to focus on the intersection of co-curricular development and leadership development. And that is what my role is now. And so I'm able to work with all different students, like I said, mainly undergraduates, but also grad students, and individually coach them as they are kind of going through their D&I journey, but also for organizations who may, be having issues within their organizations or just want to become more culturally competent. And so working with them on providing strategies and working with them on different inventories to help them improve their intercultural competence. And then from a faculty and staff perspective, our office also does a lot around training with recruitment and retention for hiring managers. So every single day is different, but I have definitely loved and appreciated the opportunity to be at the forefront on our campus of, really pushing our mission and living that vision and mission out, but helping all of our members of our community to be more interculturally competent.
Thank you. Shannon or Amber?
I can jump in. Yeah. So I think for me, I think back to my time as an undergraduate student, and, I was very active in student life and kind of broader co-curricular opportunities, but I don't think I ever really expected to be housed in academic affairs. I think during that time, doing work with the program on intergroup relations, Heritage Month programming as a student out of the Office of Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs, I think being in those contexts, I really saw myself as someone who was really committed to thinking more clearly about ways in which to engage students and thinking about student activism and how students kind of mobilize transformative change on college campuses and issues around campus climate as well. But I think through that work of sort of being positioned in IGR as a student to both facilitate classroom spaces and to talk about issues of identity and conflict and group norms and how we work through that to think about systemic issues, that being the sort of root of my journey and pathway, both professionally and then also in graduate school and now, has just been helpful in kind of framing my current lens on what this work means for me long term. But yeah, when I think back to sort of the roots of my kind of getting into academic affairs, which for me it really has just been sort of happenstance, that it's grounded by this history of engaging in dialogue and being in classroom spaces, although that was sort of, so IGR, a little bit of context. So it's housed out of both academic affairs and student life. And so it's a sort of shared appointment between those two areas. And I think being a student experiencing that gave me a sort of lens of how this work can happen on a college campus and also its importance. So I think the roots of that have really shaped my career journey and pathway. But after I finished my undergraduate career, I worked as a college advisor with the Michigan College Advising Corps. So did college advising in Benton Harbor for about 2 years. And again, that was a 2-year term limited appointment. And so I came back and worked for the Ginsberg Center, which focuses on sort of community service learning among students. So worked with a program called Project Community, which was also a sort of academic service learning experience. And so students who were working in a classroom space, kind of talking about the curricular aspects of what it means to engage in service, but also doing the work in community and then using the classroom space as an opportunity to reflect and tie in readings. And so supported that program through the Ginsberg Center at a more programmatic scale. And then after that, worked at MESA, the Office of Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs, and was I believe it was a community building or something of that nature, sort of community building program manager. So worked with a variety of groups on Heritage Month programming, mentorship programs, but really this was also during a time of very heightened tensions on our campus with relationship to campus climate. The hashtag BBUM, or Being Black on Campus, or Being Black at U of M campaign had really gone running, and our Black Student Union issued a set of demands that were in some ways reflective of a sort of history of BSU demands, but also thinking about our contemporary context and issues around climate happening on our campus that also sort of overlapped with national issues as well. And so got the chance to work with students who were a part of that movement. And again, thinking about ways that we transform our campus climate. And so after that, went into grad school and did a dual master's between higher ed and social work. And I think at that time, I wasn't really sure on exactly what I wanted to do, but was thinking about the fusion of sort of university and community relationships and how you foster partnerships between communities and universities. And really the role of a campus in pursuing a sort of public good mission and how you work with students around that. But as graduate school can happen, took a variety of classes, and I think it just sort of shaped my own framework around sort of what social justice means. What does it mean to be an administrator or staff member or professional on a college campus who's engaging in social change work, and where can I position myself on campus to do that work, both among faculty and staff, but to also have this fusion with students. And so in my current role with CASC, it is a mixture of working with faculty and staff, thinking about the partnerships that we can foster, but really doing that in a way that sort of centers students and opportunities for students to grow and to learn. And so that's sort of been my path. But again, I didn't necessarily expect to be really strongly housed in academic affairs, but as I think about my journey, there's always been a little bit of fusion between the two, but definitely more student life centered. And so the possibilities there are definitely vast.
Thank you. Shannon.
Yeah, I think similarly to Amber, I didn't necessarily expect to end up where I am. I certainly didn't expect to be working at a business school, even when I started at my master's program. It's been an interesting time. But I knew for a long time that I wanted to be in education, and for me, what that meant for the end of my years of high school and then going through college was really being focused on becoming a high school teacher. And so a lot of the things that I was involved in as an undergrad were about developing those skills and building those skills both inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom, because I was convinced that I was going to be a career history teacher. And then I was in the classroom for about 2 months when I realized that education was definitely the right fit for me. There were things about working with students that I absolutely didn't want to give up. I felt that it was a field that aligned with my values, but that standing up in front of a group of 17-year-olds for 8 hours a day was not what I wanted to do, and wasn't the part of it that I enjoyed as much as working with smaller groups of students, engaging in longer term strategic planning. I loved lesson planning. I realized more than I loved actually teaching the lessons, things like that. And so did some reflection and spoke with mentors, and realized that higher education might be a better fit for me than being a high school teacher. And so at that point, I decided to apply to master's programs in higher education and came to Michigan for my master's program. And while I was here, I realized that I hadn't spent a lot of time in undergrad exploring different types of opportunities within education. I had been so focused on one end goal that I wanted to sort of branch out and see what there was to see in higher ed. And luckily, Michigan is a huge school with a lot of opportunities to see different ways to engage with students. So I was on different student advisory boards, one with the Ginsberg Center, where Amber worked. I worked with a living learning community on campus that was focused on community engagement and social justice work. And then in my second year of grad school, I added a position on top of my internship as a graduate assistant with the program that I currently run. And that program was in its second year, so it was fairly new. there were still a lot of opportunities for it to grow and change. And at that point, my role in the program was fairly limited. I was essentially reading students' papers, but through that was getting a window into their experiences in business school and began to understand that through a different lens than I had seen as an outsider. At Michigan, there are some negative stereotypes associated with our student population here at Ross. And starting to see that through that experience through their lens rather than through how other people talked about their experience really showed me that there were opportunities here. And then when the program coordinator position for the Identity and Diversity in Organizations program opened, it felt like a natural fit. I was excited about the newness of the program and the opportunities to continue to expand and grow it. And throughout my first year, we have added 17 student staff members and, you know, incorporated some of our programming into curricular experiences here, which then led to my role growing and changing to the assistant director level that it's at now.
Well, thank you all. Y'all have had some very interesting, varied careers, and the trajectories are very, very intriguing. Now that we've brought those memories back for you, and I want you to think about your career path, and I would love for you to think about the skills that you got in the skills and professional competencies that you developed in the more traditional student affairs roles, and how you've brought those forward and how they've helped you succeed in your current position and how they may have changed over time. And I'll let y'all figure out who's going first.
Well, I think for me, this is perhaps a bit more broad, but one thing that I really value about my experience working in student life and in student affairs is understanding what it means to be operating at the margins, which I think can mean a variety of things. Sometimes that's around funding, sometimes that's around staffing and admin support. But in a lot of ways, there's a lot of skill development that can happen through that. And that some of it is also about thinking about ways in which to be creative, to be innovative, to think about partnership and how you work in partnership in a way that allows all parties to feel a part of something and to be engaged and to be valued. And so I think that's a broad skill set, but I think it's very valuable in terms of the ways that I think sometimes student life can become valued in higher education, that it is very critical work to student engagement, to student learning, but that understanding how to operate within that sort of organizational margin can, just be a sort of skill set or a learning piece that can be really supportive when in an academic context. And I think for me, so working out of the School of Social Work with the undergraduate minor, for one, it's a multidisciplinary minor, and so it's open to all students across disciplines, but it's also not a baccalaureate program. It is a minor. And our school largely services graduate students, both at the doctoral level and the MSW level. And so many ways we sit, while we are valued, we also sit at the margins of the organization. And so that really, forces us to think creatively and innovatively about how we partner with faculty, how we think about faculty buy-in, and also how we organize. And so I think that largely has been a really critical skill set that for me is rooted in being in a context where we were aware of kind of broader perceptions of who we are and the work we do. So for example, I'm thinking specifically about the work that I did out of Mesa and working in multi-ethnic student affairs and thinking about the sort of valuation and devaluation that can happen when doing that sort of work. And so when working out of CAS, remembering those lessons and understanding and enacting strategies to ensure that that our influence is recognizable and that we're also partnering and collaborating with faculty because we are a school that is governed by faculty, and so we have to be strategic in that way. And I think student life can teach you a lot about strategy, and that again, a lot of that can come from the context of sort of being at the margin of a broader institution. So just wanted to offer that.
I'll add a few more points. Amber, I agree with so much of what you said, specifically as it relates to creativity and thinking of the resources that we have and being resourceful. for every single audience that in my role, again, like I said, it's faculty, staff, students, and that can be within 1 week. And we may all be talking about unconscious bias, but being aware of the audience of which you are working with. I learned so much of that in programming and within campus activities, and that has very much carried over to my work now working in diversity education, and knowing that when people hear the words diversity, they hear inclusion, they may be a little tired of it. And so how are we being innovative and creative? Because oftentimes, especially working with students, I might have one shot in a workshop or in a training to have them to feel excited about it and to feel like this is something, that really is personally developing them and professionally developing them. And so creativity has proven to be my most important skill. And I didn't think I was creative before I got into this role. And now I'm all about the creative juices. I'm so appreciative of the space to be able to be innovative. Also, when I think about resourcefulness and specifically capacity building, within diversity education, we're a 2-person team for our whole campus. And we would not be able to do our work and be impactful in our work if it weren't for students and faculty and staff who are also passionate about this work and want to, serve as trained facilitators for workshops. And so that is definitely another skill that we have had to learn, and that I've definitely had to continue in, capacity building and ultimately collaborations. Wake Forest, being a small private liberal arts institution, is highly relational, highly about collaborating. And so we all know that in student affairs, collaboration is the name of the game. And so I definitely continue to use those skills in order to be impactful in my work.
Yeah. And Shannon, you saying that you have sometimes one shot to get to people is very similar to the program that I oversee. We see students once a year. We see every student, but it's really focused on breadth, not depth. And so one thing that was really stressed in my master's program and in some of the positions that I held as a graduate student was accepting a lack of closure. And I think for me, that has been huge in being able to come into work every day and know that some of these students are getting things out of these workshops that I'm not going to be able to see, or that it might click later for them, and be able to be at peace with that has been something that it's an ongoing challenge for me. But I think if I had not had that experience beforehand, doing this type of broad but not deep work would have been incredibly challenging. And I don't know that it's something that I would have been able to sustain long term for me personally. And on top of that, I think working with such a wide range of students who are coming to diversity and identity conversations with an extremely broad range of experiences. Some of them have taken courses and are minoring in the program that Amber runs in the School of Social Work or in, intergroup dialogues, and others have never talked about their identities before and may never talk about them once they leave the room. And so having a background in student development and being able to just have the concept of meeting these students where they are in my mind as I'm having these conversations with them has, I think, made me a lot more effective in my role, both in designing workshops that our peer facilitators run and working with our peer facilitators, and then also sometimes having one-on-one coaching conversations with students. Just that awareness of where they are developmentally and in terms of their knowledge and experience in talking about identity and diversity has been huge for me in this role.
Yeah, so I actually would echo a lot of the things that you all have already said. I think some of the things that I would add that have shown up in my work more consistently now is one, using students as partners in our work. And so I think that in student affairs work, right, when we're doing all of this kind of stuff and it's just the coordinator, and then you've got your student employees or your student interns or your student volunteers or your student mentors, what have you, you're involving them in so much of the work that we do, right? We're asking them their opinion, we're involving them in the planning, we're asking them to help with the assessment, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of times we transition to the academic side of the house, and then we stop asking students for their thoughts, opinions, right? And so one of the things I'm really proud of is In my division, my director, who is the Assistant Dean for Student Success Initiatives, has been so intentional to make sure that we create a culture of including students in our work. So any student success initiative that we do, we actually connect with the students first. And so we have a couple of goals that we try to focus on, and one of them is closing opportunity gaps for Black, Latinx, and Native American students in regard to graduation on our campus. And so we have some very specific student success initiatives that we've rolled out over the past couple of years. We didn't plan any of those without actually talking to those student communities first. And so that's something that I think is incredibly important and is a competency that I think sometimes gets lost once we move to the other side. The other thing that I would say is programming, right? So, and when you're doing really classic kind of student affairs work, you are an event coordinator, essentially, right? Like you might as well get a certification for wedding planning at this point, because you just are so involved in so many pieces. And that has continued with me as well, both my work on campus and being able to plan a big, massive staff retreat, because I at one point planned, the first welcome day event for students or something like that. And so that has stayed with me. And then the last piece, which didn't necessarily come from my professional experience, but has influenced my professional experience. So Amber mentioned IGR, the Intergroup Relations Program at Michigan, University of Michigan. That was weird that I almost called it Michigan State, at the University of Michigan. And I am also a product of that program. And so dialogue broadly, intercultural dialogue is what I was trained in. So being able to talk about social justice identities and speak across difference, but the practice of dialogue in general has just continued to show up in my work. It helps to create really streamlined partnerships. It helps to communicate across conflict, right? And it helps you to perfect your conflict resolution skills. And so the practice of dialogue has been incredibly important, both in my work and just kind of in my personal life as well.
Well, thank you all. And Jasmine, you just kind of gave me a leeway into the next question. So I appreciate that segue.
You're welcome.
Why don't you talk about your cultural, social, and personal identities that you incorporate into your work as a professional and in your current role, and how those impact and shape the work that you currently do or work that you have done?
Sure. So since I provided the segue, I'll go ahead and jump in on the answer to the question. So in regard to cultural, social, and personal identities that kind of show up with me every single place that I go, I'm a Black woman, and both of those identities, both my race and my gender, are together all the time. They're inseparable. And so that's how I enter spaces. I'm also a first generation student who transferred multiple times. So I went to community college for a year, and then I went to an HBCU for 2 years. And then I came back to Michigan to a mid-sized regional institution for my last 3 years. So I was kind of all over the place. And so that experience influences the ways that I think about student experiences and the ways that they kind of show up on campus, whether they're first time, first year, FIDIACs, or if they are transfer students or spring starters or what have you. I'm thinking about the aspects of confusion that I felt, the lack of agency that I felt, and the folks who helped me to kind of find my voice and teach me how to advocate for myself, to find the resources that I needed, and to take advantage of those. The other thing, so going back to the piece about my race and gender, on the academic, so again, I'm in a really blessed circumstance in that my division is incredibly diverse. My supervisor is also a Black woman, but there are often times that I'm in spaces where I'm the only Black woman. There are often times when I think about my age where I'm the youngest person in the room as well. I show up places, and so the students at my campus call me Dr. Lee, and I show up spaces, and so they'll say something about Dr. Lee, and I'll see other folks in the room who just kind of are surprised that I'm coming with that background and that experience. And so those are things that can continue to show up in my work. And so I think some of the ways that it has shaped how I approach my work is also trying to remember that, one, representation matters. And so it's important for me to be in spaces, to be at the table, to speak up when I'm at the table, and to bring more chairs to the table so other people can join me. And so that's really important and something that I think about all the time. And then I think the last piece, So is my religion. So I'm a Christian, and I bring that up not to say that I am like show up in spaces and I'm talking about praying and all that kind of stuff, because that's not the case. But I bring that up because I think that when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice work, we're oftentimes talking about race. We're oftentimes talking about gender. We're oftentimes talking about sexuality. Ability status has come into the conversation more, which I think is really fantastic and very important. But sometimes we're missing this intersection of spirituality. And so students are bringing a sense of spirituality with them to campus a lot of times, regardless of what their faith concept is. And even if they don't have a faith walk or faith journey, so if they're agnostic or atheist or what have you, there is still kind of this embodied connection that they have as a part of their experience at the institution. And so I try to also create spaces where students can be whole in that way, and that we're thinking about who they are and every piece of who they are and at the intersection of who they are, instead of just kind of those things that we can just readily see.
Thank you. Who else?
I can jump in. So I think the thing that I think about and is on my mind every day at work is my whiteness, being a white woman and having diversity in my title, even though it's a program for all students. And we're in a space that is predominantly white, predominantly very wealthy, and feels very, very male dominated at times, more like all the time. It is always on my mind. Our staff is not very racially diverse, particularly with the undergraduate business students. Our numbers of underrepresented minorities are lower than the rest of campus. And I think that creates opportunities for me to engage with majority group students in conversations in different ways, but I also know that it means that I have to be very conscious of listening, of building trust with students of color in particular. And, that's something that is visible. And so I think that influences my work more than some of my other identities that maybe students aren't aware of. But making sure to reach out, when we're having things that are discussion or dialogue based as sessions, the idea of it is really great, but the reality is that we don't have the demographics here to have a truly intercultural dialogue sometimes. And so how do we balance those spaces so that yes, they're educational for our white students, but they're not harmful for our students of color, is a conversation that we're engaging in a lot. And then also of the 7 graduate students that I supervise, all 7 of them are students of color, and of the 17 undergraduate students, 14 of them are students of color. So engaging with them in conversations about just recognizing that there's a power dynamic because I am their supervisor, but there can also be power dynamics around identity, and trying to be really open with them and have them also know that, if I make a mistake, please call me on it, things of that nature. I think just sort of putting it out there, recognizing it has been really important for my relationships with the students that I supervise.
I think the only thing that I will add to that is the point of so my identities and being a Black cis woman, Christian, coming from the Midwest, I'm from Ohio originally, to then coming down to the South to a traditional private liberal arts institution, and also having come from 2 large public, that's where I did my undergrad and my master's. So there's a lot of, identities that I hold that don't necessarily match the majority demographic that we have here on campus. And so what I'm most aware of when working with students, and most of the work that I do, the students will come to us. Sometimes we have open workshops, and so those may have more diversity in them, but more times than not, it's doing consultations and in working with students in their set organizations. And so as we know, student organizations can oftentimes be homogeneous in many ways. And I am very aware of being this Black woman speaking to an all-white fraternity about race. and what does that look like and what does that mean? And I can't necessarily take away the emotional tie that I have to some of the current events that are coming up that I use as examples or things that have happened on campus. And so that is just something that for my own personal and professional development to be better in this role, more effective in this role, I'm constantly checking the biases that I have and checking the triggers that I have in doing this work. And so I'm just aware of that a lot more in being in this specific context of this institution and thinking about the various identities that I hold when I'm thinking about the audiences that I'm working with. Another thing that comes up is age. So maybe not with my students, but for sure if we're working with faculty and staff, I could be sometimes 20, 30, or 40 years younger than some of the faculty and staff that I am working with. And so imposter syndrome is a real thing, is a real thing. And I definitely, that identity in terms of my age does come up and come into play when I'm, having to go and say, yep, I'm the expert at this and I can do this and let's talk about it. So that is just another part of my identity that comes into play in this work.
I'll be honest, I feel like I don't have much to build upon that. I think between specifically Shannon and Jasmine, your remarks on the intersection of sort of age, credential, race, and gender all align for me as well. And I think while I am not always consciously thinking about the intersection of my race and gender, though always experiencing that, what has definitely become increasingly more salient is age and dynamics around age, and of course, credentialing and what that means in a context where faculty govern our school. And so as we think about decision making or opportunities to really expand or grow, thinking about ways that I can also leverage other faculty to support that work, knowing that if I am the face of it, that it may not always be perceived in the same way as a tenured faculty member. And so kind of navigating those dynamics and really being strategic, but also being careful that I'm also validating and valuing myself in this work as we expand and grow. And so all of what you said definitely resonates with me as well. And then also increasing saliency around age and how I can leverage that in different ways.
I love working with a panel that provides you the segue into the next question with such ease. And this is actually a question that's come from one of our participants. And Amber, you talked about understanding the expectations and how to move things through within the academic side. So this question is very, very interesting. It says, how can we move diversity work forward to engage the entire campus community, in particular when our efforts seem to be so siloed?
Yeah. I think that's an important question. And I think it's a question that requires a collective and collaborative approach. And I think it does in some ways, to me, segue back to the importance and role of faculty. I'll be honest in that, and in many ways, I really value the efforts that are happening in student life and how staff are really forwarding diversity, equity, and inclusion work and doing it often through an intent to strive toward an emancipatory or more liberationist kind of perspective, and really bringing students into that as well. And so seeing efforts that move us in that direction, to me, have been really powerful. And I think sometimes, depending on the kind of institution that you're at and various dynamics with faculty, that getting buy-in can be challenging. And I think a part of it is understanding what motivates faculty, how they're incentivized, and how we build in DE&I work that really validates that, but also pushes and challenges them as well. And so I think one of the challenges that I've noticed on our campus that I think we're doing a better job at, but still striving toward, is thinking about faculty engagement and what that looks like in kind of a mass mobilization way, and not necessarily in silos or with individual faculty, but doing that in a way that really pushes all faculty. And one aspect of that could be a strategic plan. It could also be something else. And I think in the context of a strategic plan, that there needs to be teeth and accountability structures and all of these other facets that really push these efforts largely. But I think for me, sitting in the context where I am, saliency around the importance and role of faculty, and especially governing faculty, is really, really critical. And so one aspect, but also knowing that it's manyfold. But I also want to validate that I think a lot of staff and students are doing incredible work, but support and collaboration is needed.
Yeah, I agree. It's got to be a multi-pronged approach that happens at a variety of levels. A couple of things that I would add is that I think that there has to be top-down modeling. So I think that it is a incredible mistake to expect or require faculty, staff, or students to engage in any sort of diversity, equity, inclusion, training, workshop, mandatory course, anything, if the top-down administrators are also not willing to demonstrate their commitment to the same thing. And so I think sometimes what we're seeing is this bottom-up approach where everybody at the bottom, so all the students are coming in and doing this thing, all our new faculty are coming in and doing this thing, but nobody at the top are being held to those same expectations. And I think that that miscommunicates what the actual value is. So I think that there has to be top-down involvement. And I think that when the folks at the top can make that commitment, spend the time doing it, right? Because there is a time commitment that's involved. Not only does that recommit the value, but then it also demonstrates a certain aspect of growth that the entire institution then can go through. Because I think part of what we are often missing is that doing a training or whatever can help people to check a box. But if you want to engage in actual real cultural shift that equates to real change and different experiences on any given campus, and everybody has to be involved. I think the other piece about that, along those same lines, is that we have to create opportunities that speak to the need. And so doing these kind of just stock workshops, if you will. So we're going to have everybody do this workshop on race, for example. That might be useful, but if that's actually not the specific issue on your particular campus, if that's not the actual issue that these particular sets of individuals are coming in with, then you're kind of missing a really good opportunity for folks to grow. You're making sure that everybody has a baseline understanding, but are you actually creating opportunities for folks to be challenged, for people to kind of push their learning edges into different areas. And so I think that that's really important. And I think that more of our work has to be really intentional in that if we're talking about faculty, like diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings or workshops or expectations might be different for faculty in the College of Social Science than they are for faculty in physics, for example, right? Maybe they need to have dramatically different starting points. Maybe they don't. But if we haven't actually collected the information to know how to move forward, then we're just going to be creating things for and kind of rolling things out for no reason. And then I don't think that we'll actually be able to assess the work that we're doing, right? So as a part of graduate programs, we talk a lot about if you want to get the right answer, you have to ask the right question, right? And so I think that that's the same thing that we need to think about when we're creating these multi-pronged approaches to this work, is exactly what is the outcome that we're looking for, and what is the actual method or variety of methods that happen at the same time or at different times or in order from each other, whatever, that's going to actually get to where we need to be. And that's going to be different for every single institution. And so I think that those are the two things that I would add.
Okay.
Real quick. Sorry, can I just real quick? I just want to add one real quick point. That yes, Jasmine, I agree with everything that you said, and I think that when we're thinking about from the top down and leadership, specifically resources and budget speaks values. And so when we think about what needs to happen specifically for whatever's happening within the Department of Social Sciences versus what's happening in the Department of Engineering, and what I've seen in my role is, again, that capacity building and what are the incentives for individuals who are either faculty or staff who have an interest in just learning more about D&I, who want to take it back to their space, and who probably are the best ones to take it back to their various departments or organizations that they work in, because they are in that space every single day. But if that is something that they have to do as a one-off, or oh, great, you can go to this one workshop where you can get developed in that way, but there is not resources and incentives behind that. There is value that you as an employee are wanting to do the extra work to be more competent, to spread that among your group. That is another thing that I think will help us push to make this more institutionalized, where people are actually being valued and there are incentives for being that person or people to expand capacity on our campuses.
Wow, fantastic. We have got questions from the panelists or from the participants that I'm afraid we're not going to be able to get to. So I hate to say that at this point in time, but we are drawing near the end. We have a few minutes to go, but we do have one question from our participant that I think is a fantastic way for us to end our conversation. So when you think back to your first steps into academic affairs, what is one thing you wish you had known or that you would have done differently at the beginning? And I'll let all four of you answer that one.
I think I can jump in if that's fine with everyone. I think for me, being in a particular academic setting that I was unfamiliar with, so working in a business school and not having a business background, something that I wish that I had understood sooner was the importance of learning and adopting some of the language here. It has allowed me to communicate my needs, wants, values to colleagues and to students as well, very differently. I'm not used to phrasing why we should do something as a value proposition, but flipping things like that, even in small ways, has made a huge difference in terms of being able to be effective in my work. And it's also allowed me to listen and connect differently with students and colleagues. I think at first there were interactions that I had where just the way that certain topics or priorities were framed to me, I didn't always connect with. And so then being able to understand sort of in a business context, in sort of their lingo and their jargon, for people that have worked in corporate spaces and have an MBA, that looks very different than my background and how I would choose to talk about things. And so learning sort of to see some of the meaning through the way that it's being talked about, and be able to adapt my own language to fit that, I think has been something that's been really critical for me. And I wish I had learned to do that sooner.
For me, I would say it would just to take more time to understand the kind of the organizational chart and the structure to even though being at a small school and there is much overlap between kind of our division of campus life and the undergraduate college, every day still, I'm 2 years into this role and I'm like, oh, so that's how academic advising works here. That is the avenue to go through for this. And so while of course, we love to learn by doing. I think that just having the time and the wherewithal to know the specific questions I should ask about the structure would have been very helpful for me as I figured out, who is the best person to help market this, or what are the avenues and even the newsletters that go out that are very different than what we see for like within our division of campus life. So just kind of the structure and organizational chart. And there's just so many pieces to the organizational chart that fall under the provost area here on our campus. And that would have been helpful for me.
So similarly, in regard to understanding organizational charts and kind of the layers, the multiple layers that are often at play, I think for me, it's also been learning the game of politics, if you will. So on the academic side, I found that things are a little bit more political. And I think part of it is because, as I mentioned, I'm situated within the associate provost office. And so we then interact with multiple colleges. And so every college has their own set of goals, right? And set of outcomes that they're desiring and experiences that they want to create for their individual students. And so being able to, I think Shannon, VG, you said kind of being able to speak to things as a value proposition. And so being able to figure out how to get all of these other folks who have very different goals in mind onto the same page about why this specific goal is really important and why it matters in your students' lives, in your faculty's lives, in your administrators' lives. And so that has been an interesting challenge, learning how to speak the language, like you mentioned, and also learning how to play the game, right? Like I hate to kind of frame it that way, but that's kind of how it comes in some ways. And so I think that has been certainly an interesting challenge and something that I wish I knew how to navigate much sooner, much sooner.
Yeah, I think for me, coming from a student life context as well, having the passion, having the drive, having some skill sets around thinking about programs and connections and relationships with students, understanding that has been really important. But I would also second the sort of organizational management piece, thinking about these sort of political facets of working in academic affairs and how that plays out at various levels. I think something really critical in academic affairs that I honestly just learned on the job, working within an academic minor, the role of tuition dollars and thinking about revenue and revenue streams and how that can control for the kinds of opportunities that you can pursue, and also what that means for the larger school. And so I think working in academic affairs, I have definitely become more aware about and just curious about how funding works. And I think in student life, perhaps because not all student life programs generate revenue, but in an academic context, what you bring in can be really critical to what you are able to do, and also the kind of decisions and ways that you can push the school largely. And thinking about general impact in a school or college. So that's been really, really important for us in CAS is it's not always the fun side. And sometimes I'll be honest, it can feel a little bit capitalist perhaps, or just odd, but it is an important aspect of our work in order to continue to engage students and continue to offer opportunities and to also sustain our programs, is to be really cognizant about how our budget works, and also, again, how that leverages what we're able to do and the kinds of commitments we can really push the school to do as well. And so I think that's really important. Another aspect that I'll add is, I know I've been talking a lot about faculty, and I think understanding faculty dynamics and culture and climate and how that plays out within your specific context. I know across programs and various opportunities on a college campus that can look very different. It's not always institutional. It could be one particular organization or aspect of an organization. And I think having some awareness about that, I think asking questions if you don't know, and just being mindful is really key, because I think a lot of faculty don't necessarily have staff experience or experience as a staff member or as an administrator. And so what does that mean in terms of expectations around how you do your work and how you accomplish your work and what it looks like? And so I think that is a really important piece that, I would offer for anyone who's just entering an academic affairs context and trying to understand that largely.
Well, our time together has come to an end. So on behalf of ACPA, the Coalition for Multicultural Affairs, and the Commission for Academic Affairs, I want to thank Shannon Ashford, Jasmine Lee, Amber Williams, and Shannon Van Gundy for sharing your experiences with us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who will close us out.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon, Jasmine, Amber, Shannon, and Lynn for moderating. So we've recorded our webinar today, and we hope to share it out to both attendees and through the ACPA website with the Coalition for Multicultural Affairs and the Commission for Academic Affairs, who co-sponsored this. So at this time, we will end the webinar.